Yo, it's Gluke. Welcome back. Today, we're talking about audio warp modes and how to change audio stuff. Let's go. Alrighty, welcome back. Episode 21. Today, we're talking about audio warp methods. Now, before we get started, I want to say that I'm launching my Patreon today. So if you want this project file, I'll go ahead and leave a link in the description below, and you can sign up and download that and follow along. So to get into it, I've got 3 different clips of audio here. I've got 2 song starters, and I've got a drum loop. And when we load in audio into Ableton, chances are that the BPM of the sample is going to be different than the project. So Ableton is going to have to figure out how to make the audio sound normal, or how we want, between these 2 BPMs. And Audio Warp gives us a couple different options on how it can fill that space. First, I'm going to do beats, and then I'll do repitch. And then I'm going to do tones and texture because these 2 are kind of similar. And then I'll do complex and complex pro because these 2 are also similar. So to start off with, we have beats. And so the way that beats works is that it's going to preserve the original signal, but based on rhythms. We've got a couple options here. So we've got quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, and transients. The most obvious way to show what beats is doing is that if I set this to eighth notes, and then we have these 3 parameters that can tell it how to fill the space. So this one, it'll play the sample and then play it in reverse. This one, it will loop. And this one, it will play and then stop. If I go ahead and set it to the first one where it just stops and then bring this parameter down, we can hear that Ableton is going to start cutting every 8th note of the sample. Now, to show off how the other modes work, what I'm going to do is double this sample length a couple times so that we have it really stretched out and everything's going to be very obvious. And I'll go ahead and set this to quarter notes so that we can really hear every single change. So with this mode, it's going to play on every quarter note, and since we haven't told it to fill the space afterwards, it's only going to cut every quarter note. Now, if we set it to loop, you can hear that it's going to start to get a stuttery effect because it's playing that little snippet of each beat over and over again to fill the space. And if we do the same thing but set it to the reverse, we can hear it go back and forth as it's trying to fill that space. So I've found that usually beats mode is really good for cutting up drum loops. If you want just a little extra ambience or you have some breaks that you want to use, it can help you really start to isolate those elements and clean up the sample overall. So I have a shaker loop here. And since drums are usually only put on the 16th note grid, we can set the beats mode to 16th notes, and then we'll set it to just play through, and then we'll start to bring this parameter down so it's cutting every 16th note for us. So this is what it sounds like without any change. Then as I bring this down, it's going to start to make each drum hit a bit tighter. I found that this is much easier to layer into an existing drum section. The next mode I'm going to talk about is repitch. And what repitch does is it doesn't have any controls here. And that's because when we warp a sample to a different BPM, you can think about it like on a vinyl record. If you play the vinyl at a faster speed, it's going to increase in pitch. And that's what repitch does. So if I set this back to the original BPM of 140, I'll go ahead and drag the end here and change the length of what we're listening to. And you'll be able to hear that we get different pitches out of it. So repitch is a bit of a special mode, but it's really useful for getting new ideas. So if you're stuck with an idea and you're not sure what to do, you can just turn it into audio and then just stretch it out and repitch it, and you'll be able to get new sounds out of that. But I don't really use this one very much. So the next mode I'm going to talk about is tones. I've found that tones and texture are really good for getting that trippy and sort of stretched out sound. So if I get rid of the rest of this sample and take just this first bit and stretch this out all the way as far as I can, we can hear that with tones, it sort of acts like a granulator, where it's going to take small little snippets of the sample and try to reassemble the overall tonality of the original sample. And we can change the grain size, and that's going to have an effect on what we hear. I really like using tones for more ambient pieces because you're able to get really bizarre sounds out of this if you stretch it. And the same will be true with texture. We have a bit more control over the grain size, so we can go down to 2 instead of 12. I'm not really sure what this unit is, but 2 is indeed smaller than 12. So if we go ahead and do the same thing here, where I'm just going to play the sample and we adjust the grain size, we'll be able to hear the different effect that it has on the audio. And something that's unique about texture that tones doesn't have is that we have this control called flux. And this control is going to help us smooth out some of the grain sizes here so that we get a bit more of a smoother, more coherent sound. And it becomes really obvious when I set the grain size to 2 because this just sounds super weird. But you can hear that when we have flux at 100 and the grain size at 2, that there's a lot more randomness and character to the sound, whereas if I turn the flux all the way to 0, we just sort of get a tone. So that's how tones and texture work. So I'm going to use this loop to talk about complex. There's really no difference. I just got tired of listening to this one. With complex, this warp mode works how you would imagine an audio warp mode to work in your head. With complex, it's going to maintain almost all of the original sound and just stretch it based on BPM or pitch. We don't have any controls here, but this is really good for repitching vocals or if you just need to repitch something in a clean way. So if I go up a fifth, and if I go down a fifth, or if I double the length of it, everything gets moved in proportion to how it's supposed to be. So complex is the best at maintaining the original quality of the sound. So with Complex Pro, we have a bit more control over it, but it's essentially the same thing. Here we have our formants and our envelope. Now the envelope is going to be the amount of formant shifting that we apply, and the formants are going to be how we're changing the audio so that we can either reconstruct or deconstruct the formants of the signal. And that sounds really complicated, but it will make sense in a sec. So if I take this down an octave and I turn the envelope off, this is what it's going to sound like. And as I increase the envelope, it's going to try to take the formants of the original signal and apply them to this new signal. And so this is what that sounds like. And so what we can do with this one in particular is pitch our vocals down or up, and then we can use the formants to adjust it so it doesn't sound super warpy. So I have this vocal here, and it's in A sharp minor. So what I would need to do to make sure that they're in the same key is pitch this one up 3 steps, so that way we are in C sharp minor. So this is what it sounds like on its own.
Roll back up on mine, nowhere, just wear black. Pull out and put in. Get up and don't lie.
And now I'll pitch it up 3, and I'll turn the envelope all the way off so that we can hear what it sounds like just pitched up.
Roll back up on mine, nowhere, just wear black. Pull out and put in.
And so we can use the formants to start to get some of the original character back of the sound, but it will maintain its new pitch.
Roll back up on mine, nowhere, just wear black. Pull out and put in. Get up and don't lie. Roll back up on mine.
So that's a brief overview of how these warp modes work on their own. So I'll go ahead and use these loops to write a little song, and then I'll go back through the song and highlight all of the ways that I use the different audio warp modes to write the song. Alrighty, So here we've got a little bit of a song going on here. Let's go ahead and listen to it first, and then I'll go through and show you where all of the techniques that we learned in this video got applied.
Roll back up on mine, no words, just went blind. Pull out and pull in, get up and don't lie. Roll back up on mine, no words, just went blind. Pull out and pull in, get up and don't lie. Roll back up on mine, no words, just went blind. Pull out and pull in, get up and don't lie. Roll back up on mine, no words, just went blind. Pull out and pull in, get up and don't lie. Roll back up on mine. Pull out and pull in. Roll back up on mine. Pull out and pull in. Get up and don't lie.
Okay, so that's what the song sounds like. To get into it, first we have our chord progression here. What I did was I pitched the chord loop up and down a bunch using beats and then kept flattening them so I got this really glitchy effect on it. And then I manually started looping the sections that I wanted. So I kind of used the original chord progression as a template and then was able to reshape the sound into something a bit more glitchy here. So this is what that sounds like. And then for some more texture and movement, I added an erosion and an auto filter with the LFO on it. And then to build out the harmony even more, I took a cut from the other song starter that we had. And I just got this tension note off of it. Together, they just started to pair really well. So that's what I went with. I did end up writing this piece to add a bit more atmosphere to it. And all of these runs are pretty much just following the key signature that we're in. So all together, this is what that sounds like. The only other thing that I wrote was this operator bass line here, and it's literally just the default with a little bit of erosion. This is just to help emphasize the chord movements that we have going on. Now, the next part that I really used the audio warp modes to get some new noises out of it was on these drop stabs here. And what I did to get these was I took the same cuts that we had before from this section, and I just placed them here. So this was the first chord. And then this was, I think, the third chord. And I repitched them by octaves using Complex Pro so that I could get different formants out of them and they would sound different from what we already heard before. And to get this little stuttery part, what I did was I pitched up one of the chords an octave and then set it to beats. And it gave me these really tiny little cuts of the chord. And then I just retimed them a little bit so that it made sense within the context of the beat. Now there's one more layer in the drop that's a little bit harder to recognize, but I took a vocal cut from the main vocal here. I put it on the offbeat of the 4th count in every measure. And so that way it just added a little bit of extra rhythm. So this is what that sounds like. And with this one, I repitched it a bunch using Complex Pro and then flattened it. And that way I was able to get different formants out of it. And then here's the other one. And I got that just by pitching it up an octave and then setting it to beats on transient. And I found that these little extra hits just added a texture that I was looking for in this section here. Now there's really only one other section that I used some of the audio tricks that we saw today, and that was in this section in the break coming out of the drop. This is what that sounds like on its own. And what I did was something similar with the chords where I pitched up the vocal, set it to beats so that it was giving me really tiny slices, and I put a vocoder over it. And then through the vocoder, I routed the chords from earlier to play through these little vocal cuts here. And so without the vocoder, this is what it sounds like. And so with the vocoder, it turns into this like really nice percussion vocoder thing. And so the techniques that I wanted to show in this video are ways that you can get new sounds out of what you already have in your project, so that way you don't have to keep adding new things into your project. Ableton gives you a lot of ways to change audio, and so I hope that this video helped outline some of those with regards to the audio warp modes here. That's really all I got for you today. So if you found this video helpful or interesting, please be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to hit the bell so you get notifications when I post new videos. This project file will be available on my Patreon. I'll leave a link down below for that. And with that, we'll see you in the next one.